Assalamu alaikum and good morning. This is Amina again from New Wave Global. Today, I am in conversation with somebody from Sweden. I am talking to Professor Mattias Gardell. I hope I got his name right. I just learned how to pronounce it. He is specializes in the study of religious extremism, religious racism in the United States, and has been studying groups such as Ku Klux Klan, Nation of Islam, and folkish movements in neo-organism. He is basically professor at Uppsala University. I hope I got that right too. If not, please correct me later. And he is an expert in comparative religion and also heads the Center for Research in International Migration and Ethnic Relations at Stockholm University. He's an expert in Islamophobia, and he's testified as an expert witness in the trial of Anders Behring Breivik and co-authored Sweden's section of the European Islamophobia report that was published in 2017. Thank you, Professor Gardell, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So today we'd be discussing somewhat of a sensitive issue that recently occurred, and which is associated with the burning of Quran in front of a mosque in Sweden. And it was done by a person of Iraqi descent, who's a Christian. So I just kind of want to get your perspective on, and this is not an isolated incident, something that has been happening pretty frequently in the past in Sweden. So I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on what's the instigation, what's the thought process or motivation behind such an act?
Thank you. That's it. It's very serious questions, and it's very sensitive, of course, and it's very much about the time we live in, I think. And you're absolutely right. This Quran burning that happened during Eid al-Adha, a couple of days back, was not unprecedented in recent Swedish history. Since the year 2020, we have seen more than 100 public Quran burnings in Sweden, most of which was instigated by another person, Rasmus Paludan, a Danish ethno-nationalist who wants to prohibit Islam and expel all Muslims from the Nordic countries as part of his vision to realize a world without Muslims. This, of course, provoked protests from the Muslim street and from many people concerned with human rights and anti-racism and all of these things. Some of these protests turned into violent clashes with the police, most notably during the so-called Easter riots last year. And to understand this, I think that it's necessary to situate the Quran burnings in the history of the West and in the contemporary political situation in Sweden. So looking at history first, for the past 500 years, we have burned books in the West as a way of eliminating the evil that these burned books are held to contain, which throughout history often has come to include the people that read and cherished these works. The first major Quran burning in history took place in Granada, 1499, after the fall of the last independent Muslim emirate, 1492. The Muslim population had been allowed to keep their mosques and traditions if they only swore allegiance to the crown. This changed when Jimenez de Cisneros, who was the confessor of Queen Isabel, was appointed Grand Inquisitor to Granada and got horrified when he saw Muslims on land sanctified by conquest as Christian, in his opinion. And to intimidate the Muslim population and to speed up their disappearance, Cisneros collected Qurans from mosques and libraries and private homes and instigated the first major public Quran burning at the marketplace in Granada. Unsurprisingly, this led to protests that were repressed by the Catholic monarchy and led to the prohibition of Islam, the ban on Muslim culture, the hijab, language, holidays, clothing, and eventually to the great expulsion, as it is called, by all Moriscos, that is Christians of Muslim background, from Spain in 1609. And in 2020, since then, this pattern has been repeated throughout history. And in 2020, this was what Rasmus Paludan, the Danish ethno-nationalist extremist, tried to get going in Sweden by public burning of the Quran, provoking protests, and that should be stamped out by repression by the police. The answer to riot, normally by the state, is always repression. And so eventually he wanted to build up a situation that would expel Muslim people. So it was a clear case of incitement of hatred. And in Sweden, of course, the constitution protects freedom of expression, and freedom of expression to us is one of the cornerstones of a free democratic society. It's something that we really think should be heavily protected. And that includes, of course, freedom of expression for the press, for the residents, for public parties, for all of these things. But freedom of expression is not something that exists in a vacuum. It's not an abstraction. It's not that it's absolute as a principle, but it is actually infringed by also other rights and freedoms. So it's you cannot tell lies about other people in public. You could not incite hatred, and hate speech is banned in Sweden. So this coexists with freedom of expression. So the idea here, I think, is that we already have all the laws in place to prevent any repetition of this. So this was not a case of an act of blasphemy. This was not a case of anything like that, but it was very, very clearly a case of trying to incite hatred against Muslims as people, and by denigrating Islam and Muslims publicly. And this is really not allowed by Swedish law, which to me makes it surprising that Paludan, as of yet, has not seriously been tried in court, suspected for having violating the
law
and for inciting, committing a hate crime.
So I understand that you've mentioned and you've alluded in your conversation that freedom of speech is a cornerstone of Swedish democracy, which we understand. But do you think that this act is actually really a freedom of speech? I mean, I know the perpetrator, when asked, did say that this was his right of expression, which is provided by the Swedish law. But like you said, there's a whole precedent behind it. So is it more like ethnic religious targeting versus them just using this this clause that you have, or freedom of speech or expression that you have, and then kind of furthering their ulterior motives of, like you said, eliminating Islam or denigrating Islam?
I think that when it comes to Paludan, which is a case that I have gone through very, very carefully and recently completed a major scientific work, academic work on, that will be published. And so I went through everything when it comes to these more than 100 public Quran burnings that he did. And when it comes to this case, I think it's very clearly an act that targets Muslims as people. and that's banned in Swedish law. So this is not a case then, I think, protected by the Constitution nor by European law. So it should be tried, and of course it needs to be tried. It needs to have be tried in open court to be established. But I think that it's a very clear case because everything is contextual.
Yeah.
So it would be very, very different if a Danish, in this case, as he is, Paludan, who is a Christian, if he would burn the Bible, that would mean something totally different than if a Christian burns the Quran. And if the Christian burns the Quran in the context of denigrating Islam and Muslims and wanting to ban Islam and expel all the Muslims, then of course it borders on incitement of racial and ethnic and religious hatred and should be tried. He should be held suspect for violating the law. I think when it comes to the perpetrator of the Quran burning during the call for prayers at Al-Adha, we, as of yet, do not know sufficient. I don't have sufficient information about the perpetrator. I know that he is a Christian. I know that he is an Iraqi national. I know that he is a member of the Sweden Democrats, which is a reformed National Socialist Party that's very explicitly anti-Muslim. I know that he is only a member. He hasn't been awarded any official position. He goes out to media and claiming that he will run in the next elections and he wants to take place in the Swedish parliament. But all of that could be just weather, just lofty words. So I think that the situation as such invites a lot of adventurism. People who, for other reasons, might want to take the opportunity because they don't like Islam and Muslims, because they like to get rich and famous and protected by the police, because they want to get millionaires. If you do this in the West, you would know. You live in the United States. You have the same kind of characters there that actually get quite rich by going out and being, trying to incite hatred against Muslim people. It's a whole industry, and you can become very successful if you do that. And the thing that it might work tells you a lot about racialized tensions in society. And I think there is a huge discrepancy between what the democracies of the West tells us they are and what really happens on the ground. So I think that it's exactly these tensions that these type of instigators could try to ignite and then flame the flames and then hope for, for political reason or for personal reason or economic reasons or narcissists and or people that are not. That remains to be tried in case to case, I think.
So taking forward the conversation from that standpoint, so any such act has to be approved, my understanding is, by the authorities, and this particular act was also approved by police. So it seems like that police or the authorities, when approved such act, and I know there's precedents where they had kind of tried to block that in the past, and they had been that had been overturned by the court. So they went ahead and approved it, thinking that it would not generate such a response, such public anger from all over the world. Do you think that's something that they could have anticipated and prevented and kind of circumvented in any way?
Sure, I think it tells you a little bit about the provinciality of Sweden. We know we are in this remote, northernmost corner of Europe. and got quite surprised that oh, it's a world around us where not everyone thinks exactly the same as we do, and it's mind-boggling that they even could act surprised by that reaction. It was very easy to foresee, I think. I think when it comes to the police providing permit, as you said, you are very well read into the complexities here. The police tried to deny permit, not on the ground that the permit was only sought in order to commit the crime, that is a hate crime, but because that the police is only allowed to deny permit if a demonstration could be anticipated if they cannot guarantee to safeguard, guarantee everyone's safety, if they cannot guarantee public order. So that's a curiosity of Swedish law. We have a very strong freedom of assembly, very strong freedom of demonstration. So it is legal to call for a demonstration centered on an act which is illegal, because you don't know if someone call for a demonstration to do something, you don't know that they actually will proceed by doing it.
Yeah.
That remains to be seen. But in the minute that if you to call for a demonstration does not give you liability to commit a crime during the demonstration for which you have a permit. So if the instigator actually do commit, proceed by burning the Quran in a context that's clearly anti-Muslim in orientation, which is very much the case, I think here, then he will be suspected for committing a crime and should not be protected by the police, but rather arrested and then tried in court.
Okay, so that remains to be seen at what happens in this case.
That remains to be seen. And now they are talking about, oh, I'm sorry. You were.
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
Well, it's when it comes to this is not the first time the world has reacted to things that transpires in Sweden too. Sweden gets shocked. We know from history that what works is if you hit the wallet. So I think that they are very concerned when people start talking about boycotting IKEA or H&M or Volvo, things like that. And right now, the objective of the Swedish government is to get its application into NATO approved. Yeah. And these recent Quran burnings jeopardize that objection. So it's a critical situation.
It is, yeah. Actually, I was going to ask you about that because Turkey specifically has been blocking acceptance of Sweden in NATO, and this is one of the reasons why it's been doing that. It has happened in the past, and my understanding is that there were going to be talks in near future about revisiting that issue. So could it just have been a conspiracy act to jeopardize that? That just have been the motivation? And Swiss government, based on their policies, I know they kind of condemned the act and called it an act of Islamophobia, and also said that it's not representative of U.S. I apologize, Sweden government in any way. But are they willing to take any steps to prevent something like this in future and not jeopardize their chances of joining NATO?
No, it's a lot of things that remains to be clarified. I think we have seen a few other efforts to burn the Quran publicly done by political milieus that actually want Sweden to stay outside the NATO, which NATO, it's not a democracy, it's a military alliance, it's all over the world. It doesn't really have a record of winning wars. So the US, for instance, has been involved in 135 wars since the end of the Second World War, and they lost every single one. So not everyone in Sweden on the street is that enthusiastic to join the NATO, and it was never discussed. So it was just an agreement by the parties, and the population in Sweden was quite surprised. And there are activist milieu that, oh, this is a brilliant opportunity to prevent this from happening. So you have that as a factor. I think when it comes to Paludan, the Danish fascist, he was taken aback because he really wanted Sweden to become part of the NATO. So he said, oh, it didn't go as I planned. He hadn't anticipated that. This character that made the latest disgraceful act during Adda, I think also it's just such a matter of indecency. A lot of things it's also regularized by codes of conduct and rules of normal decency, that we all need respect and dignity and all that. When you violate that, and this person who I can't really review him, but he came quite recently to Sweden, and now he wants to defend Swedish values. And what are these Swedish values? Burning the Quran, being indecent against people? I don't think so. That's not the Swedish values in my mind. So it's a very, what exactly he wants and what exactly he wants with NATO, that's very, very unclear, I think. And maybe he's just a narcissist. Maybe he's trying to prevent himself being kicked out and having to return to Iraq, because right now it would be very dangerous to return into Iraq. I think that can't happen according to Swedish law, because you cannot expel someone to a country in which they are risking their lives or imprisonment or torture or things like that. So who knows? It remains to be seen.
Yeah, the motive still, in this, at least this recent happening, the motive still needs to be determined. So you did mention it, and about Swedish values and how this person is trying to project that he's trying to protect Swedish values. But what's the general sentiment in public, around this act? Are they as appalled and horrified by this act, or at least dislike it, or they are supportive of the freedom of expression and letting people do whatever it involves, even if it involves really hurting one of the populous religions in the world?
I think all of the above. I think a lot of people are I think nobody really appreciate him coming here and defending Swedish values and everything like that. Who are you doing that? But take that aside. I think that there is a very strong anti-Muslim opinion also in Sweden that has been translated also into violence. I did a study 2018 on all the mosques and Islamic congregations with access to prayer hall facilities, and it turned out that 59%, 6 out of 10, had experiences of being physically assaulted. 67% had been severely threatened. And there is, lots of good documentation for discrimination in the labor market, in the healthcare section, and all of that, only of people who have Muslim names. That is, you don't know if they are practicing Muslim, you don't know what tariqah they followed, you don't know their interpretation of any ayah, you don't know anything about their relation to God, actually, because you don't talk to them, but you see that they have a Muslim name, and hence you choose someone else, even though that Muslim, we have done such experiments, field experiments at the academy, that people with Muslim names could have better qualifications and yet not get a high qualified job. So you have a high level of normalized anti-Muslim discrimination. You have also a high level of people who take objection from racism. If you look at Islamophobia, I don't think Islamophobia only is a matter of attitudes. But if you look at Islamophobic attitudes and opinions, these are stronger in areas where there are no or few Muslims, whereas they are diminishing in areas where many Muslim people live. So the presence of Muslim counteracts Islamophobia as such, not necessarily so that Muslims need to inform people about the content of true Islam or not, because I don't think Islamophobia is that much about Islam either. Most people that are Islamophobic don't know anything about Islam, not as anything meaningful, and they have not studied it. They haven't understood it. They don't know the wealth and richness and traditions and histories of anything. So it's in that way it's a very, very primitive thing. So it's more akin to racism against people who are Muslims or considered to be Muslims and associated with Islam. And the situation there, when it comes to, I think we also came into the opinion when it comes to these, how people should behave against each other. Publicly, I think that the majority in Sweden think that you should be a decent person. You should not publicly insult anyone. And even though, of course, we have a freedom of expression and we do value that very, very much so, I think that most people would react to a person, say, starting to badmouth his parents, that, okay, I keep my distance from that person, but if that person uses his freedom of religions to go against my parents, he has to run. So I think that people understand this logic. And it, of course, such an act, again, these are not abstract principles. They are depending on context and time. Who do what against whom, in what time and in what context, for what reason. So if a Swedish person burns the Swedish flag in Sweden, it will mean something else than if someone not coming from Sweden burn the Swedish flag. It's very offensive. I think that most people understand that, and I think that the when it comes to history, Sweden has for many hundreds of years been an absolutist monarchy. And it was only in 1951 that freedom of religion was introduced. So it took a long time to get these freedoms established. And, nobody can say that they work without problems as of yet. But so a lot of people think that these are so important to safeguard. We cannot start to infringe on these, and they don't remember that actually this is not a case of freedom of religion. It is a case of a anti-Muslim trying to incite hatred against Muslims as people, and that's different because people don't like hate speech either. They don't. They like freedom of expression, but with freedom of expression also comes responsibility. And people do not like hate speech, even though you have high levels of racism, even though you have high levels of normalized racism. You have a lot of racist jokes. You have a lot of discrimination in all important areas. But ask the general opinion in Sweden, and they would, a huge majority would take exception from hateful speech. Yes.
So I appreciate that sentiment, and I'm sure that's accurate representation of general Swedish population. But while I was researching this, I came across that after this recent incident at Eid al-Adha, there have been further requests to authorities for similar protests, asking permits to burn Quran. And in fact, it was kind of a little bit of a surprise for me. Amongst those requests, there is one that is asking to burn Torah and Bible too. So do you think, so do you think that this has kind of led to this a perpetual act of misusing, for the lack of a better word, freedom of expression, and this is and everybody's trying to join that bandwagon now to for whatever reason to enhance their personal interests or interests of others? And is this going to start a new wave of something similar?
It has been a wave, yes. I think it's starting already, and that could have different explanations. And let me come to that. When it comes to burning the Jewish holy scripture, the Hebrew Bible and the Torah, that was very much center in the National Socialist book burnings during the Kristallnacht, and Sweden being close to Germany. The National Socialist regime and the Holocaust is something that people should normally try not to go in that direction. So doesn't mean anti-Semitism is still around, but we know the role of the burning of the Torah in the history of anti-Semitism, in the history of genocide. And my conclusion when it comes to burning the Quran is the same. There is an intimate connection between Bibliocaust and Holocaust, between the burning of books and the burning of people as such. And I think that you should be very, very aware of history when you turn into this, on this street, because it's a dangerous street. We've been walking there before. We know what lays ahead. And we know also that there are people who really want to provoke us, push us into that alley, who want to go there again, who really, because those who are explicitly racist and fascist, they know that they are too few. They can't do it by themselves. They need to get the machinery going. And I made a lot of studies before on you mentioned Anders Behring Breivik in the introduction, and he's just one of many so-called lone wolves, that individual white fascist men who commit acts of heinous massacres against people in order to provoke such a reaction, to get the wheel of violence and retribution and uncertainties motion, trying to find the keys to the racial war. And I think that was exactly the motive of Paludan. And you never know. You invite other people to do the same now, and it could be for various reasons, but it also shows that you can't really have a situation like this. You need actually to start implementing the laws that we do have. You don't have to infringe on the freedom of expression to do that. You just need to implement the laws against hate speech that already is there. You don't need to change anything. You don't need to amend anything. You just need to also find the Muslim population as important to protect as any other part of the population. Because what you have seen now when the authorities realize that, oh my goodness, they start to now jeopardize our entry into NATO, they start to boycott Swedish products, it might hurt the economy. Now they react as if for the first time the Quran burnings negatively affected something that they've held important. If they would help their Muslim population, because these are Swedish people.
Right.
These are our neighbors. We've been living together for a long time now. We know them. We've gone to school to them. These are colleagues at work. These are colleagues at university. They are not aliens. They are our neighbors. It's about co-living, and the government is responsible to protect the population, all of it, in all of its diversity, no matter what faith community they belong to. It should, that's part of democracy, equality before the law. They should be as entitled to a life in dignity and security as any other part of the population.
Understood. Thank you so much, Professor Gardell, for spending time with me and joining me for this conversation. It was very insightful, very enlightening, and I really wanted to bring the Swedish perspective to the whole thing. I know there's rioting going on all over the Muslim world. There are bans, protests, everything. And I really wanted to get someone from Sweden who has an in-depth knowledge of what started this, what could be the motivation behind this, and kind of bring it out to everyone too. So thank you again for your insightful conversation and your helpful comments. Thank you.
And thank you so much for inviting me. Much appreciated to come to talk with you, and all the best.
Thank you.